Greyhounds are still available for adoption in the United States. They're just not coming from the United States. Two American adoption group leaders, Bob Koch and Debra Hardman, shared their perspectives on rehoming Irish and Australian racing greyhounds in the U.S. Next on Greyhound Nation. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 44, recorded June 5th, 2024. American Perspectives on International Greyhound Rehoming. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for Greyhound enthusiasts produced by Greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns, and now here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, Greyhound lovers. In previous episodes, we've covered certain aspects of international Greyhound rehoming. We've had folks on from Ireland, from two states in Australia. And so tonight I thought we'd change it up a little bit and get some American perspectives on the international Greyhound rehoming programs. We're going to change up the format a little bit. And since we have all three of us here are leaders of adoption groups that are participating in the international programs, we're going to have more of a roundtable discussion than a classic Q&A interview. So let's first off welcome our guests. We have Debbie Hardman from Greyhound Adoption League of Texas, Arizona branch, and Bob Koch from Nittany Greyhounds in Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start off a little bit about what groups you're with, what groups you lead, how you got started, and what your groups do, where they are, and so forth. And then I'll kind of clean up a little bit and talk a little bit about my group. Bob, let's start with you.
Nittany Greyhounds started back in 1997 with a person by the name of Elaine Oleska. She found a greyhound, and took it in and started the program right out of her house. It then blossomed into a larger group where she ended up getting more people involved. And we've placed a little over 2,500 dogs since 1997 throughout the United States. And we are based in State College. We actually have a kennel there.
Very good. Debbie, how about you?
Well, I've adopted my first Greyhound a little over 10 years ago, and that's when all the volunteer work and getting involved in this community started. I started as a transport working with an adoption group here in Arizona. I also spend time on the East Coast, so I've worked with a group out there. But today, we just recently formed a subchapter of Greyhound Adoption League of Texas. As you mentioned, the Arizona chapter. We started in February. It's pretty neat. A lot of the women that are in the group have been involved with Greyhound adoption for over 20 years. They've come to Tucson to retire. So we've got someone from Georgia, Colorado, California, and Washington State. So we started in February, and to date, we have brought in and helped place 30 dogs. So it's been pretty exciting.
Excellent. And you're based there in Tucson.
Yes, that's true.
What's your adoption territory, so to speak?
Yeah, we covered the Southwest. So we've done adoptions in California, New Mexico, Nevada, and basically the surrounding states here. So there's a lot of need. So we've got dogs to supply.
Yeah, that's great. Bob, how about Nittany? How far out do you go?
We actually have placed dogs in Arkansas, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, Maine, and the whole East Coast.
Very good. Well, I'll clean up a little bit. I adopted my first Greyhound in 1994 and fell in with a Greyhound club that was actually started by some show Greyhound people, ironically enough. They'd kind of let it go and languish, and we kind of revitalized it, those of us who had adopted Greyhounds. And then in 1998, I was one of the founders of Southeastern Greyhound Adoption. We became a chapter of Greyhound Pets of America a couple years later, and we've been going strong since then. We've like Debbie and Bob's group, we've participated in both the Irish program and the Australian program. So let's get right into that. I think it's fair to say that the Irish program started a little bit before the Australian program. Bob, how did Nittany get involved in that?
We actually saw uh, Barry Coleman, who runs the program over in Ireland. He posted 4 dogs on Facebook, and we saw them, and we jumped on the chance and said, "We'll take them." And that was how we first got started with the Irish program. And that was it'll be 2 years ago in September that we took our first international dogs from Ireland.
And Debbie, your group hasn't taken Irish Greyhounds yet, but your former group did. You were involved with some Irish Greyhounds in the former group.
Yeah, that's correct. When we were having a difficult time with the Tucson track closing, people wanted Greyhounds. So I was introduced to you through another group, and we started bringing in dogs here into Tucson probably about 2 years ago. So, yeah, today we have yet to bring in the Irish, but we hope to do that soon.
Well, let's talk about the Australians now. Debbie, what was you were in kind of on the ground floor with one of the first groups that came in from was it Victoria or New South Wales?
New South Wales. So, yeah, a year ago, January, the first flight of Australian dogs that came through New South Wales arrived in Los Angeles. We met the dogs at the airport, transferred them back to Tucson, and placed them in their homes. So, since then, we've worked with a group in Victoria. I've had experience there, plus, ongoing right now with New South Wales. So, it's been great.
And Bob, how about Nittany? What was the what groups did you take from the Australian states?
We started out with Victoria. Sean Stanton, who runs the program over there in Victoria, he actually came to our kennel. He came to the States and met with us, and we took our first batch of dogs from him. It was a year ago in January. And then we just recently started taking dogs from New South Wales. That's been about 4 months ago. We started with New South Wales.
You know, one of the differences between the Irish and the Australian programs is that there's not as many flights into the U.S. from Sydney or Melbourne as there are from London, which is how we get the Irish Greyhounds. So they have to take a little bit more circuitous route. Bob, what's the itinerary for the Australian Greyhounds coming in there into Nittany?
They fly directly from Australia over to Vancouver, Canada, and they're kept overnight. And then the next morning, they're put on another plane by Worldwide Pet Transport, and they're flown into Toronto, where they're housed overnight. And then the next morning, a driver will pick up the dogs, and they will literally bring them across the border to us wherever we want. We've had them delivered to the Welcome Center in Niagara. They've brought 6 dogs down to Harrisburg here so that the Maryland group can get part of them. And then we've also had them deliver them directly to our kennel in State College.
How about Debbie? How about in Arizona? There, they all come into Los Angeles.
Yeah, so for the Australian dogs, they do have a direct flight from Sydney as well as Melbourne into Los Angeles. So it initially started where we would go out and basically uncrate the dogs ourselves at the cargo facility. We have now just processes have been proved where the dogs are transported by a local kennel and pet hotel that goes out, picks up the dogs, brings them back to their facility. The dogs then stay there for the night. They're fed, they're given a chance just to kind of relax and regroup. And then the dogs get to us one of two ways. We either hire a transport to bring the dogs, or selfishly, we like to go out and pick them up. So we'll go out with a couple of minivans and can easily bring back 8 dogs. So, yeah, a lot of changes from when the first flight started to where we are today.
Yeah. So you of the three of us, you've really been the only one that's seen the Australian Greyhounds right off the plane there in LA. Tell us a little bit about how they seem after their journey. You know, a lot of folks are, oh, a Greyhound can't handle that kind of flight, or it's hard on them, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about your reaction, you know, and seeing them come right out of the crates off the plane.
Right. So I mean, I shared the same concern, right? That's a long flight. They're in a crate. Unbelievably, these dogs are just, they come out wagging their tails, in amazing shape, right? Uh, very, very happy. And the other thing that struck me is for as long as the flights are, the dogs have not soiled. It was an exception, but for the most part, those kennels, the crates and their bedding is dry. And if it is wet, it's from when the forklift that has picked up the pallet has tipped the crate where the water bowl then, spills water inside. But it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's just it is amazing that they come that far and seem to be no worse for the wear, especially from Australia, which is about double the time from Ireland.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob, how about you? When you've seen them, of course, you haven't seen them right off the plane from Australia, but you have seen them after their road trip and so forth. How do they seem?
They're happy. They want to come out. They got to go to the bathroom. They're wagging their tails. They're jumping on us. They're very happy dogs. I mean, you would never know that they just flew across the country and then all that distance in a crate. They just don't act that way.
Yeah, yeah. Now you've met them from Ireland. You've met them right off the plane from Ireland, I take it.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They come in. We have them come in directly to Philadelphia or to Pittsburgh. I flip flap back and forth because I've got a volunteer group on either side of the state that wants to participate. So I alternate between Pittsburgh and Ireland. I mean, I'm Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And yeah, I've been there. I'm part of that crew that comes into Philadelphia, and they same thing. They come out of the crates. They're happy. We take them for a walk, put them in our van, and head them up to another 3 hour drive up to the kennel after they come into Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I would
Go ahead, Debbie.
I'd just like to add, I think a lot of that is attributed to the selection process of the dogs from the originating country. So they do a behavioral assessment. They're not going to put a dog on the plane that's injured or is timid. These dogs that are coming in, from my experience, have been extremely confident and happy, and that's just part of their disposition. So I think that has a lot to do with it, is the selection process and the work that happens before the dogs leave.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that.
I've gotten the Irish Greyhounds. Michael and I both have been to the Atlanta airport and to greet them coming in on British Airways from London. And yeah, as I like to say, they walk out of the crate like they own the joint. And they got to go. They're ready to go to empty out. But other than that, it's amazing to me. You would think it would be a bewildering experience for them, but they take it all in stride and they're out wagging their tails and ready to go on to the next thing. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the process of it. The Irish program is run a little different from the Australian program in the sense that we have a Facebook working group for the Irish program that where everybody says when they can take greyhounds and so forth. And Barry Coleman and his team over in Ireland kind of coordinate all that. And then we have to go through the government regulatory aspects and get the import permit and so forth. Bob, what's been your experience with the Irish side of things in terms of how it's organized and planned out?
It runs very well. I mean, there was some working things that they needed to work through in the beginning when they first did as far as the selection process for each one of the groups. And now what they've made the change where they do the random rotation for the selection of the dogs, it's working out much better for all the groups. It's more fair as far as that's concerned. And bringing them over, the import permits are provided and the documentation we all fill out and send back in. It runs very smoothly. I mean, I'm very impressed.
Yeah, I have the same impression, and I agree with you about the random selection process. Uh, they put the greyhounds that are available for next month's transports up with profiles and photos, and then Matt Shumitz, who's GPA national vice president, he has a software program that makes the draw random, and then it's kind of like it's kind of like the NFL draft where we're all making our draft choices, it's done in about 20 minutes. We select a time, we get on Messenger, and whoever's the random draw first, they pick, and then you just go from there. And it's kind of fun. I've participated in a couple of them, and you never know quite who you're going to get, but more often than not, we've gotten most of the ones we wanted. How about with you, Bob?
I have. I mean, there's been a couple of times when there's ones that I wanted and that wasn't my turn, and didn't get lucky. But the last selection I did, I actually got all four of the dogs that I selected were all four of my choices. So
Yeah.
I was pleased with that round.
Yeah, it's and the good news is you can't go wrong. They're all
No,
going to be
not
nice
at all.
dogs.
No, they're
Uh
all wonderful dogs.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
when you're looking for a particular dog that you know you've got an adopter that's looking for, and you don't get it, unfortunately, you have to tell the adopter, well, you're going to have to wait till the next round, and hopefully we'll see what we can do the next time around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Debbie, what's the Australian process like?
So it's a bit different from the Irish program. We are supplied the biographies and vet paperwork. So the dogs are pretty much selected for us. So we get the vet information, the biography and assessment of the dog, usually about 2 to 3 weeks before the dogs arrive. So, and that's worked out well. Uh, we have sometimes people go, why are there so many black dogs, right? So fortunately, we have people today that are just grateful to get a Greyhound. So the colors really has become a non-issue. So we've gotten a nice selection of dogs from both the Victorians and New South Wales. So, again, we have all the information and the stuff we get on the front end that allows us to start screening and recruiting those adopters. So it's a little
Yeah,
bit different, but
absolutely. Yeah. We when we started the Irish program, there were so many black ones, and there still are. We adopted Henry Ford's comment about his cars. We said you can have any color Irish Greyhound you want, so long as it's black. But
there you go.
we don't seem to have the trouble. You always hear about black dogs get adopted last and so forth. We just don't seem to have that problem anymore. I think the black ones are just as well valued as the white ones or the fawn ones or the brindle ones or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
We have never had a problem placing black dogs. I actually had 8 black dogs in my kennel ready to go, and I was considering having a Black Friday sale that I could move some of the dogs. But this past weekend, I had 4 black dogs go out, so into new homes.
Yeah,
So
yeah. You
I just
know, go ahead, Debbie.
No, I was just going to say, I tell people, which is I'd like to believe is the truth, is that the black dogs were fast, so they kept breeding more black dogs, right? I mean,
Right.
so
Yeah, exactly. One of the other differences I'll throw in here because I've got some participation in it is that for the Irish program, you have to have an import permit just as you do for any other dog coming from international origins. And we do that on the American side. I'm one of the people that applies for the import permits. The Irish folks supply the USDA health forms that show the vaccinations and the rabies and so forth that the dogs have had, and then we apply for the permits through the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, for our international listeners and viewers. And then once that's issued, they're good to go, and they can come in that way. And then they clear through customs. We typically use a customs broker. With the Australian program, and Bob and Debbie, tell me if your experience has been any different. The Australians handle all that. They get the import permit, they clear the dogs through customs, they retain the local customs brokers, etc. It's not a big deal. It's not a big difference, but it is one difference in the program.
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I completed a power of attorney, so they act on my behalf. So all of that administrative and even getting the dogs from customs, that's already taken care of on my behalf. And then we bring the dogs, we just pick them up, and we still get all the paperwork as if we had done the process from the very beginning.
Yeah. Bob, do you have to, for the Australian Greyhounds coming in, do they have to clear both Canadian and American customs?
no, they do not. They clear the Canadian customs, but the difference with bringing them into Canada is that we had to apply for a non-resident business number and get a license to be able to conduct business in Canada. And that's the only added addition that we have as far as the Australian dogs are concerned, because then
And
they're just driven across the border.
so no USDA import permit is
No,
necessary when they come in through Canada.
because they're actually being imported into Canada and then they're just coming across the border into the States.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. That's one that's one less hoop to have to jump through for sure.
Yeah. The
Now
business
let's
license was a little bit different to get. It took us 6 months to get ours.
oh wow.
It took and while we were working during the pandemic on trying to get it, and they were short staffed, so it took them a while to process them. Now I spoke with Annette out of Motor City and Sue Murkowski. I can't remember what group she's out of. I was helping them get their business license paperwork in order. They both got their business licenses in a couple of weeks because they're backed up to full staff. Because at Greyhounds in Gettysburg, we were chatting, they hadn't gotten theirs yet, but it was the next week that they both got their business license to bring them in through Canada.
Is it expensive? The license?
There's no cost.
Yeah. You just have to establish that you're a legitimate business and so forth.
Right, and what the purpose of our business is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about what happens once the dogs arrive at your with your group. Where do they go? How long are they there, and so forth? Debbie, let's start with you.
So when the dogs arrive, we have found a kennel. It's a commercial facility that has their kennel space and runs. We reference the requirements from both Ireland and from Australia, from the Greyhound Welfare Integrity Commission. Both countries will specify size of the kennels. So the dogs will go to the kennel. We have a mobile vet who then goes out and just does a well check of the dogs. And then typically within a few days is ideal. The dogs then move to their foster homes. So for example, dogs that arrived on Friday have moved to foster homes today. So how much is that? That's less than a week, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it just works better. It's hard to do, coordinate transport with volunteers to get them to the vet. There's just a lot of moving pieces. So the kennel has served us well, and it's just a short-term stay.
Who takes care of them there in the kennel while they're there?
It's a fully staffed facility. So they take care of the dogs. We actually have access to a play area. So the dogs get playtime a couple of times a day. Again, in Arizona with the heat, and we do have dog walkers that will go out and walk the dogs. But with this heat right now, if we can't get out there early morning to walk the dogs, then they're in an area that they get playtime.
And Bob, what's Nittany's process on first arrival?
Nittany brings the dogs in, and we actually have a kennel up in State College that holds up to 40 dogs. We do all breed boarding. Being close to Penn State, we have a lot of the professors and the university staff will board their dogs when they're on vacations, but we always manage to keep space for the Greyhounds. Now, if we have a full kennel, the dogs will come in. The Irish dogs, of course, we have to bathe them within 2 days after they arrive into the States, and then send the documentation off to either you, John, or whoever is in charge of the USDA form that particular month, so that we can get that taken care of. With the Australian dogs, we're not required to bathe them, but they're taken in. I have a full-time staff person that works at the kennel. My kennel manager lives on the property, so she's always there to be able to take care of the dogs if necessary. And then if we find that a dog is not doing well, we'll move them. I mean, if they're having a hard time being in a kennel area, we'll move them into a foster home right away. We have foster homes both in State College, in the Pittsburgh area, down here in Harrisburg, where I am, and some over near the Philadelphia area will also foster for us if we need to. But they're usually not there that long. If we do end up having a dog that's been there too long, we will definitely move it out and move it into a foster home to get it out of the kennel.
Yeah, just for our listeners, what Bob's referring to, that one of the differences between Australia and Ireland is that the USDA has put Ireland on the list of countries that have a pig disease called African swine fever. It does not affect people. It does not affect dogs, but it's tick-borne, and that's the reason for the bathing, is that you have to certify that you've bathed the dogs within a couple of days of their arrival. I don't think we've never found a tick on any of our Irish greyhounds. Have you, Bob?
No, not even on the Australian dogs either.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I can understand the requirement. It's a little silly to apply it to greyhounds from Ireland, but nevertheless, that's their rule, and we comply with it. But Australia does not have African swine fever in that country, and so we don't have that one extra step with the Australian greyhounds. We bathe ours, the Australians that come in, just so they're nice and fresh and fluffy after their trip. But that's we just do that for both. In our group, they come in, and we have a dedicated kennel in our vet's office. He has a large boarding facility in the first floor of his clinic, and then we have a designated dedicated space for that. And they come into that. They get bathed the next day, whether they're Australian or Irish, and then they're there for about typically between 10 and 14 days. While we do our secondary assessments, we profile them again after they come in. The vet has checked over them to make sure there's no problems. There rarely is. And then once they've been profiled, that's when our matching process starts. We've already got most of the time the applications approved, and we've got homes waiting for them. But once we've gone through that process, then we do the matching with the homes based on how they profile, and then we finalize the adoption there at the kennel. So typically, it's about 10 to 14 days stay there, where there are guests at our boarding facility. We do have some occasionally that will go to a foster home. There may be one that didn't get matched, and we never wanted a greyhound alone there in the kennel. So if we have a single one left, we'll put that one in a foster home, and he or she will stay there until the right adopter comes along. And again, it's usually not very long for them as well. Debbie, what's been your typical, from arrival to adoption? What's been the time for your greyhounds?
It's been about 2 weeks. So again, with the information we get on the dogs, the bios, we've been working with the adopters, share that information, get to know them really well. Back at the kennel, that's where we also can do profiling right away. And we've been fortunate, there's been a lot of repeat adopters. So the dogs can skip going to foster, they're immediately adopted. So I just have to share, we have not had any bounce backs in the time that we've started and followed this process.
That's great. That's great.
Knock on
knock on wood is right. One of the, bounces are inevitable. You're going to have one of it. It's not a matter of if, but when. But it's great if you've gone 6 months with the start of your program and you haven't had any yet. You just never know. You do the best you can to match them, but sometimes folks are not as patient as they might be. Most of the time, the bounces are, I say, adopter calls, not greyhound calls. That's been our experience anyway.
Same here.
Yeah. One of the most frequent questions, I've given some talks at a couple of greyhound gatherings about the international program, particularly the Irish program, and the most frequent question I get is, how do the Irish greyhounds or the Australian greyhounds differ from American greyhounds? So, Bob, let me throw that one to you.
Well, we've noticed that the Irish greyhounds have a tendency to have a shorter snout. They're a little bit more fuzzier than our dogs, and a little bit more stockier than the American dogs. Now, we have found that usually after the first year, they've lost all that fuzzy coat and they're down to the nice, smooth, sleek coat that we see here in the States. We actually, an interesting story is, we actually had a dog that we took from Ireland who had black ticking all over his body. And we saw him 6 months later at Greyhounds in Gettysburg, and the ticking was all gone. It was on his white coat, fuzzy coat. And because he lost his fuzzy coat, he was now smooth and he didn't look like the same dog that we brought over from Ireland.
How about
So,
that?
but most of the dogs that's the difference that I see, that we see from the difference between Ireland and the States.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know why exactly the structures are different. My theory is that they're a little closer to the coursing bloodlines. There's been a lot of intermixing in Ireland between the coursing bloodlines and the racing bloodlines, and the coursing greyhounds tend to be a little stockier, a little thicker necked, and so
Yeah.
forth. And I think that's my best guess as to the reason for that. We've gotten, and I'm sure your group has too, the Irish Tried Retired Greyhound Trust will take coursing greyhounds as well as racing greyhounds, and we've gotten some coursers in our group
So have
as
we.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No difference really, other than the coursers tend to be a little bigger. I don't find any difference at all in temperament or quality as a pet. How about Debbie? How about you? You've taken both. Do you find any difference in the quality of the pet they make between the American, the
No,
Australian, and the Irish?
no. Again, I think both you and Bob covered it well, just from a physical standpoint. And again, if there's anything from a behavioral standpoint, I think it just goes back to the selection process back in the originating countries. I don't think that they're different emotionally, or however you want to say that, or have a different temperament just because they're from Ireland or Australia.
Yeah. Bob, what's been your experience with Nittany
Um, as to
as to the temperament and personalities
There's no
and
difference.
qualities as pets?
There's been no difference. I mean, we actually placed one we thought it was a retired racer, and then when when our adopter did some research on the dog, they found out that it was a coursing dog, and then they wanted to do some investigating, research on what was the difference between a coursing dog, a racer, and a racer. So we've never noticed any difference as far as temperament, behavior. It's just the stockierness is the and that once we found out that he was a courser, that made sense. And he was a lot more stockier, had more of a thicker neck.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, we all know that all racing greyhounds originated from coursing greyhounds back in the 1920s. That's who they bred racing greyhounds from in England and Ireland and the U.S. And that DNA pops out every now and then, even generations later. We've taken in racing greyhounds that put me in mind of some greyhounds I had seen, running at the Waterloo Cup in England. So it does come, it lurks back there and does come through from time to time. Debbie, what's your typical backlog of adoption applications that you all have?
Well, with starting out, we really don't have a backlog because we're moving pretty fast with the applications, or the approved adopters. So, and I think we're not the only group right now. I think we're seeing some of the adoption applications slow down a bit. And I personally think that's because people have jumped to the assumption that the racetracks are now closed or pretty much closed in the United States. And so there's no more greyhounds. So I can't tell you the times I've walked up to people with my dogs and they're like, what, there's still greyhounds? And so I think that's part of why the adoption applications are down a little bit right now for us.
Yeah, we've had that same experience. We've had to kind of re-educate potential applicants. No, there's a shortage of American greyhounds to be sure, but there's not one of greyhounds in general. So by all means, if you're interested, don't hesitate and don't wait to apply. The wait time is not what it used to be
Right.
because of the proliferation of these international programs. Bob, how about Nittany? What's your typical kind of waiting time, and how many typical approved applications do you have at any given time?
I have 50 open applications right now that are approved, waiting for a dog. My problem is that the majority of the applications need to have a cat safe greyhound. And we all know that's very difficult to find.
Oh, yes.
We did have two of our volunteers would bring their cats to test for us. Unfortunately, both those felines have passed away, and we have not found another one that is willing to bring their cat to the kennel to do testing. So that's my biggest problem is finding a greyhound for. So I've had some people that have been waiting for a year for a cat safe greyhound, based on where they've fallen into my application um, time frame. But
Yeah.
right now, I mean, I'm still getting applications, and I think that's probably due to the fact of my location because I'm right in central Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and there's no active groups working in the Pittsburgh area. Although I did hear that Going Home Greyhounds is now starting to work again. Um, and there's nobody in my immediate area in central Pennsylvania. And then the next closest one is in Allentown. So a lot of people are coming to me because they know I don't have a geographic area that I stick to, whereas a lot of the other groups will not go more than 50 miles from their home base. So, I mean, I just got 4 applications in the other day.
Yeah.
People applied.
Yeah. 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 Cats. Not many people have cats, but as one of our board members once said, I think cats have taken over the world. Uh, and if we can get an adopter that doesn't have a cat, we call them solid gold. But yeah,
Yes.
it is a challenge. And you're right, it's a challenge to find cats to do the cat testing with. And for those folks that aren't familiar with that process, no, we don't just put the cat down in front of the greyhound. The greyhound's muzzled and the cat's protected. And 9 times out of 10, it's the if the greyhound gets a little close, the um, the cat will give him a good slap, and that's always a good way to for that greyhound to know that this cat means business. Speaking of business, we actually had a cat that we used as a cat tester named Mr. Business, and he was all business. He did not take any guff from any greyhound, and so that was a great way to do that. But it's a constant challenge to find a good brave greyhound testing cat. Debbie, what do you all do about that? How do you cat test?
Well, I was going to say, Bob, we should probably talk after this call because we've had cat workable dogs come in lately. In fact,
Yes.
it's been pretty amazing. So what we do, same thing. We've got a wonderful woman and her husband who have 3 cats not far from our kennels. So we start there with the kitty intro, and then once the cats, or once the dog, I mean, they like to sniff, they walk away. And then there's others that are like your dinner and you can't even pull them out of the house. But the ones that seem, that have passed that first introduction, we have a couple of volunteers that have their own cats that then the dog will go to kitty boot camp and stay with them before we then pass them on.
Debbie, do you? It's going to be something just off the top of your head. Do you have a feel for? Are there different percentages of cat tolerant greyhounds among the American, the Australian, and the Irish? Have you noticed any difference in, do more Australian greyhounds tend to be cat tolerant than American greyhounds, or have you noticed any difference?
I haven't, but you know what? And again, this isn't scientific, but I tend to find the dogs that didn't race or didn't race well tend to be a little bit more, have a lower prey drive that makes them more cat workable. Like I said, I don't have all the numbers, but I truly feel, just based on my experience, that comes into play, but definitely not where they originated
Yeah,
from.
yeah. Bob, how about Nittany? Do you find any difference in the percentage of greyhounds that are cat tolerant in the American versus the international dogs?
Not really. I'd have to say it's about 50-50. One of the benefits that we have with the kennel that we do all breed boarding is that we have a lot of small dogs
Mm.
that that are boarding. So we will do testing with them. Um, and based on their behavior with the small dogs, sometimes we can get a feel that we think that the greyhound will be cat workable, and then we actually literally have a step by step handout that we give to the adopter on how to properly introduce the greyhound to a cat. And it's a 7-step process that they have to go through to make it work so that they can have the cat and the greyhound be happy together.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We haven't kept statistics either in our group, but my feel is that there's not a huge difference in percentages that are cat tolerant. We pray they all will be, but both the Irish and the Australian folks, they have the same difficulty that we do in finding cats to cat test with. I don't think the any of the Irish greyhounds have come across having been cat tested. They've been exposed to small dogs, and I think occasionally now they're more and more in the Australian greyhounds. They're they're finding cats to expose the dogs to. Debbie, have yours come across as any of them cat tested from Australia?
There have been a few that they've marked that they think, the dog has made an introduction, excuse me, and didn't pay much attention. And when we retested, the same thing held true. So, yeah, I mean, we're getting some good information that helps us.
Yeah, yeah. Our last guest on our last episode was dog trainer Steve Austin from Australia, and I don't know how we got onto this subject, but he was talking about he had heard about somebody having a mechanical cat, and that they could, expose dogs to, whether they're greyhounds or any other breed. So I told him he must send me a video of the mechanical cat once he gets to see it for the first time. It'd be interesting to see, if we could all get one, how if they respond differently to a mechanical cat versus a real flesh and blood cat. Uh,
Yeah, you can't beat the real
oh, that's
thing.
right.
At the end of the day, you can't beat the
Yeah,
real thing.
absolutely. Let's talk about a little bit about the adoption contract. I think a lot of international listeners and viewers may not understand, what the conditions are under which we rehome our greyhounds. Just about every group I know of has an adoption contract. Bob, tell us a little bit about the Nittany. Just hit some of the high spots for what the requirements in that adoption contract are.
We don't usually require much as far as we don't require the adopter to have a fenced in yard. We have many of our adopters will be in an apartment. Our only real true restriction that we have is that if you have a child under the age of 6, we will not adopt to you. That is our one restriction, because we have had, by experience, we've had people, especially first time adopters, who aren't really familiar with the breed, will not pay attention, and the dog will snap because the child doesn't understand the boundaries that they're required to have. We don't require you to be within, as I said earlier, we don't require you to be within a certain distance from our kennel. We will adopt to previously owned Nittany adopters first. We also will do people that have a greyhound who have recently lost their greyhound, another greyhound, and the other one is not doing well. I will move them up in the process so that I can get another dog into that home to help the behavior and the depression from the dog that's left in that family. Um, our questions are basically, have you owned a greyhound before? Will you crate the dog if necessary? Will you return the greyhound to Nittany if anything changes? We ask the ages of the people, the number of people that are in the house, how long the dog is going to be alone, if at all, and for how many time. We ask if there are grandchildren coming over and at what ages they are, just so that we have a better understanding. If we have a person who is living in a home with multiple people, and not necessarily like roommates, all the roommates, everybody in the household must come and meet the dog so that we can make sure that the dog is going to be okay with everybody, and that they're going to be okay with having to take care of the dog if the adopter is not going to be around. I do ask all my first time adopters to read Retired Racing Greyhounds for Dummies.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
must. And when they come to the kennel to meet the dogs, I ask them if they read it. Oh, and they, they can, of course, they can lie, tell me, yes, they have, but I can usually tell in conversation whether they have read it or not. Because, it'll tell you what you need to know and what to expect. And I ask everybody in the household, you must read this book so that you have an understanding of what you're going to get into. I just had one of our previous her parents adopted from us. She just applied, and we just found out that she's going to have somebody living with her. Well, she didn't indicate that on her application. So now I'm in negotiations with her again to make sure that we have this roommate knows what's going to be expected when the adopter is not around. So we do ask for references. We don't do home checks. I know we've been criticized about that before, but I use it as as an example that I have one of our best adopters that we've ever had adopted 4 dogs from us. I had to do a delivery to her from one of our raffles. And when I went into the home, if I'd have saw that home on a home check, I wouldn't have adopted to her. But so it's like, people can fix up their home. So we don't require home checks, which I know we've been criticized for in the past.
Does your adoption contract require them to return the Greyhound if they ever don't want it or can't keep it any longer?
Yes. Yeah, it has to come back to
And
Nittany.
are they required to keep you kind of informed on their contact information if they move?
Yes, what we do. Yes, if they move, they have to let us know where they're going, where they move to. We have actually asked also is that if we have an adopter who is adopted from us years ago and they're adopting from us again, we ask them if if anything on their previous application has changed. We ask them to fill out another application so we can update their information.
Yeah. Debbie, what about your group's contracts? Similar, or do you have additional provisions as well?
Yeah, I think the contract process, well, and as Bob has talked to, the stuff that leads up to making sure, we're very, very individualized when we do an adoption. So, in terms of geographic location, age of kids, that's not part of a criteria that we have people go through. We look at each individual person and their environment. I've seen well-behaved six-year-olds that are more better behaved than a 15-year-old at times. So it really comes down to the adopter and their responsibility. So in our adoption contract, it states in there that, if they're no longer able to care for the dog needs to come back to our organization. If they should move, we need to be kept up to date. We also, discourage going to dog parks because of some of the injuries that can happen there, and the requirement of having a leash, collar on. Don't let them run in an open space. Again, with just being aware of the surroundings and the natures of the greyhounds. I think it's pretty. It's pretty. We cover pretty much everything. Yeah. The contracts really haven't become an issue for us. Because I find our adopters, they want to stay in touch. They join the communities. They get great support. So, the contract's really just more of a formality, and covers us from, any liability after that dog's adopted. Yeah. That becomes the liability of the adopter. But I haven't really encountered any issues. It works well.
Yeah, I think most all the Greyhound adoption groups that participate in the international programs and adopt American Greyhounds as well, pretty much have very similar contracts. Our contract has all the things that have been mentioned. The requirement for return. They can't even give it to a family member if they don't want it. They have to at least let us know first. Right. Sometimes we'll approve that family member to have it, but they have to be in touch with us. The whole obligation to keep us in touch and keep us apprised of their contact information, so we know where our Greyhounds are, where they've gone, where they're living, right. And so forth. So yeah, we no off lead in an unfenced area. That's a standard one there. So yeah, I think we all have pretty much the same or similar contracts between the various groups. You mentioned the community of Greyhound lovers. Debbie, talk a little bit about what your group does in terms of uh, social activities, that sort of thing.
Right. So we just, like I said, we just formed in February, but part of the GALT organization down in Texas. And this isn't unusual. There's like birthday parties. There's social events that can be helping to raise money. And it's really a lot of fun for the volunteers who have been part of that dog's, journey from track to home to see the dogs again. It's, again, I think it's those gatherings that are the social gatherings that most of the organizations and groups offer. And they're highly attended from the ones I've been to or the ones that I've been a part of in prior groups.
Yeah, Bob, your group, Nittany, they host one of the big McGillas, so to speak, of Greyhound gatherings and events. Tell us a little bit about that. I'll let you put in a plug for Greyhounds in Gettysburg.
All right. Yes. We took it over about 12 years ago. Nittany Greyhounds took over Greyhounds in Gettysburg, which is based in Gettysburg. And it is open to the Greyhound. And we've actually now opened it up to the Sight Hounds. We're encouraging all Sight Hounds to come to Greyhounds in Gettysburg. It is a 3-day event. It starts on a Thursday evening. It's always the last weekend in April. We start with a parade and a hot dog social and a raffle at the Outlet Mall in Gettysburg, which is where Greyhounds in Gettysburg originated. That was the very first location when it was run by Triangle. We then moved it into the All Star event and we moved it inside. We have speakers that we bring in. We had a couple of 2 years ago, we had an international Greyhound in Gettysburg, where we had Barry come in from Ireland. We had Sean come in from Australia. John was able to get Charlie to come in from England and speak about the history of Greyhounds. And then we usually have vets, specialty people that talk about different things. We have a paranormal gentleman that comes in from the Gettysburg area that talks about paranormal experiences. And that's our annual fundraiser, and we have had it's now become international. We have people that come in from Canada, they come in from all over the country. Vendors come in selling their wares, all Greyhound, and we usually that's where we see a lot of our previous adopters, or our adopters will make sure that they show us their dog. They got to show us how they're doing, and we can touch base. And we have a big banquet. It's always a theme. This last year it was Woodstock. We have two thoughts on what we're going to be doing this coming year. I'm not going to share them because it's going to take some planning, and we got to go to the board with that. But that's our main event. Then in August we hold our annual gathering of the Greys back at the kennel. We invite all of our adopters to come with their dogs back to our picnic. We have it catered. We have a gentleman that comes in. We do a speed run. We have a raffle. Our store is theirs, and that's just a way for all our Nittany adopters to get together and see each other, meet each other, and make a connection to wherever they are presently located.
Yeah, I think I previously opined on this. Some people don't necessarily agree, but I really believe that Greyhounds in Gettysburg is going to be one of the leading national Greyhound gatherings in the coming years. There's some other good regional ones. Mountain Hounds, Greyhounds Reach the Beach in Dewey, Sandy Paws in South Georgia, and so forth. But I really believe that Greyhounds in Gettysburg is going to be the king of the national events, and you deserve it. I've been a couple of times and
Thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed it. Great speakers, which is what I go for. And
Mhm.
So I, just keep up the good work, and I hope it continues to raise a lot of funds for you.
We had a very good year. We were very pleased with this past year.
Yeah. We do. Our group does an annual event in May. Typically, we call Grey Fest. It's just for our local group, although anybody that wants to could come for sure. And then we do a picnic in the fall here at our farm. We call it the Bring Your Greyhounds meeting. We have our club meetings quarterly. You can't always bring greyhounds to those, but so we try to have a meeting where you can bring your greyhounds. So we do that as well. We've actually hosted a couple of the GPA conventions. Those used to be a big national event as well, but it is difficult for one chapter to host those, and so they kind of went into a period where they've now just they will kind of piggyback on one of the national events. So that's I think that bodes well for the greyhound adoption movement in the community and in the U.S. going forward. I want to talk a little bit about support, greyhound adoption support. I think it's fair to say that almost no group just says, "Thank you for your adoption fee. Have a great life." We always stand ready to, deal with any behavioral or veterinary issues. That for the lifetime of the greyhound. Debbie, can you talk a little bit about what your group does in that regard?
Yeah, so we're starting to provide information before the adoption occurs about the dog, their behavior. Once the dog is adopted, we have running mates that will stay and work with the adopter, checking in, see how things are going. It's not unusual for like a first time adopter to run into situations and have questions. So that running mate becomes a great resource. So we have that. And then as the community starts to build, people start to help each other out. But if we get a call on a behavior issue, which hasn't happened in a while, we have access to behaviorists that are willing to jump in and provide support. So there's really, um, it's a pretty great support system. Even, vet recommendations, when a greyhound needs a dental, a lot of people, are looking for a vet that does a good dental, with greyhounds being special, and also that it's affordable. So, yeah, I think it never ends. We're always
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but we stay really, really close. And you can tell with an adopter when they're like, those check-ins and things like that become further apart, but we still reach out.
Bob, how does the Nittany support function work for adopters?
So basically, what we do is when a person comes to pick up their greyhound, we send the dog home with them that day, and then I contact them after 3 days, check in with them, see how things are going. If they have any issues or concerns, they can address them with me. We continue to work through that. I'll give them suggestions, and then I let them know I'll check back with them in another few days. And I continue to do that until they tell me, no, everything's great, we're good, let's finalize the adoption, at which time we do. If there's a process or if there's an issue that happens that I can't help them with, as Deb does, we also have a behaviorist who will work with our adopters for as long as they're a Nittany adopter free of charge. He actually does have a business called Doggy 911. That can be 5 years from now. If there's something pops up that the dog has now got a different behavior, they can contact him and he will help them through that process. We also have a medical fund that if we have an adopter that has a medical issue that they are not able to afford, we will assist them depending on what the cost is. We will help them with that medical procedure because our feeling is that we would rather have the dog stay in their home with their owner. We will help the cost rather than have the dog come back to us and then we have the full cost of it and then have to find another home for that particular dog. So we actually have established a medical fund for that purpose. And we have, helped out with teeth cleaning if we've seen the dog and we know that the dog needs to have their teeth cleaned, we'll pay for that. We've had a couple of dogs that have come in with plates and screws and rods in their legs. We've paid for the removal of that if that's necessary. We will take care of if there's a dog that we have, because we have an agreement with Wheeling that we will take any injured dog that they have, regardless of the injury, and we will continue with that care. If we have somebody that comes
Yeah,
in,
that's
go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was going to interrupt. I
Oh,
accidentally interrupted you.
oh, we will, if they want to take the dog and the dog is still going through their treatment, we will continue with that treatment for that dog until that dog is cleared by either their vet or our vet. We've
Yeah.
also had some of our adopters that are not in the area come up to our vet up in the State College area for procedures that we've had them do there because they're familiar. She's all familiar with our dogs that we've had when they've been at the kennel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great support network, that's for sure. We have running mates like Debbie's group, and we have a Facebook group. We on that members, volunteers, and adopters can join as kind of a mutual support network to ask questions or just post interesting pictures or whatever it may be, news of the organization, upcoming events, and so forth. So that's proven to be a valuable tool that our adopters like. Um, Debbie, what you got going on there? Somebody unhappy?
Yeah. Do you want to stop a second or should we
No,
just?
no, that's okay.
Okay.
We're a Greyhound podcast. We expect to
Okay.
hear a Greyhound every now
I'm like, oh my goodness. All
and
right.
then.
Yeah.
um, well, all of this costs money, obviously. So let's talk about how you run your group financially. Donations and where they come from, and let's talk a little bit while we're at it about our other revenue item, which is adoption fees. So, Debbie, where does your group? Where do your funds come from?
So a lot of the funds are donations that come from private individuals, especially to help us get started. But in general, with most groups, you have people that recognize the cost for veterinary care, the cost for, food and the care for the dog while before they're adopted. I think that I would say, and I think this is an opportunity today because we're getting amazingly healthy dogs from Ireland and Australia. We're not putting as much money, at least with our group. Bob, you're getting dogs from West Virginia that are injured, but a lot of our veterinary expenses have gone down, but our transportation expenses have increased. So that's where we look for ways to get the support, whether it's a volunteer or somebody who helps sponsor, the transport cost for us to go into LA and bring the dogs back.
What's your adoption fee for Australian and Irish Greyhounds?
Right now, our adoption fee is $750. We probably, and again, it'll be interesting to see because, while there are the groups are helping, the different countries are helping with some of the costs for transportation. We definitely keep an eye on that because airfare can go up and down, and plus, if it's government run, sometimes the funding's not always there. So we just kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what the funding will continue to be or if it ever drops off. So I would anticipate at some point we would come up with more need to cover the transportation costs, which then we would build into our adoption fee and raise it.
Yeah. Bob, you've mentioned Greyhounds in Gettysburg as Nittany's, big fundraiser. What are some other sources of fundraising for your group?
We are, of course, donations, and a lot of times some of our adopters, when they pay the adoption fee, will give us more. They'll round it up, and that's also considered a donation. There's also an event in Center County, which is where the kennel is located up in State College. They do an annual, it's called Center Gives, and it's for all nonprofit organizations in the area where you register your organization with them. And then it's a 2-day event where you actually donate money to the cause that you want to. And that's an additional revenue for us as far as money coming in. And then we have a couple of meet and greets that we do that, but that's very little monetary money that comes in. And we, unfortunately, when we get the dogs from Wheeling, we have to pay for their spay and neuter, in
Right.
addition to any medical costs for injuries that we're taking care of. So that's an expense that we incur. We don't pass that on to our adopters. That's something that we take care of with our donations.
What's your adoption fee
Our
for Nittany?
international adoption fee is 900, and our domestic American is 600.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we've done all the normal fundraising things over the years. A few years ago, we received a very large grant from one of our adopters who was a trustee of a family foundation, and so we've been whittling away on that. We gave about half of it away to other Greyhound adoption groups for through grants, and we do the usual other fundraising as well. We're doing more what we would call passive fundraising now. Our adoption fee is we have a bifurcated fee, just like Nittany. It's $875 for the international Greyhounds and $470, I believe it is, for America. It's been quite a while since we've gotten any American Greyhounds. Bob, does Nittany get the West Virginia Greyhounds very often?
We don't. It's sporadic. It's like all of a sudden we get a phone call and say, "Hey, I've got dogs. I got to move. Can you take them?" And we always say yes. Like for example, we got four about 2 weeks ago, and then we just got two on Friday, and we just got another two yesterday. Now we may go a couple of months before we get any more from West Virginia. None
Right.
of the dogs that we just got were injured. These were all just retired and needed to be moved because the owners are moving
Yeah.
dogs around from other tracks, from Charleston, and a lot of the dogs that came out of Caliente went up and pushed dogs all north. So we were getting dogs there, but we don't get them from West Virginia at all, very often, and we don't get
Yeah.
them from Charleston. It's just out of Wheeling that we're getting dogs from.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're let's close out with a look into the crystal ball. Um, what's the future of Greyhound adoption like here in the United States? What's your best guess, Debbie? Where are we going?
Oh boy. I think that we're in a turning point, to be honest with you. I think that the adoption process or model may change with the working with the international dogs and with the different governments. So, and I personally would like to see us work more closely together across groups. Like I wouldn't have been able to place those 30 dogs without working with 2 or 3 other adoption groups. So I hope the future becomes one that we all work together and forecast how many adoption applications we have, and then work with the Australians and the Irish to say, okay, we can bring in this many dogs and get them dispersed. So um, that's what I hope. I'd like to see that happen. And it is happening now.
Yeah, Bob, what does your crystal ball tell you?
I think we're going to be around for a while, especially with the international dogs coming in. At first it was a concern because of the cost for us to bring them over. Are are the adopters willing to pay that kind of money? But when you think about it, if they're going to get a domestic a show breed, they're going to spend $5,000 on a dog. Whereas if you're getting a retired racer that's older, trained, it's much more better deal by getting a retired racer than going out and buying an AKC registered dog for a couple of $1,000s. And I would like the same with Debbie. I'd like to be able to see that more groups would work in conjunction with each other. I was very fortunate that the Maria from Greyhound's placement in New Jersey, she was helping us get Australian dogs before we got our license or our business license for Canada. And I then, in turn, helped two other groups get their business license. And I've been working with the Maryland group, Ethel Whitehurst out of Maryland, getting Australian dogs and Irish dogs with them. We've gotten a bunch of dogs. We've gotten either 6 or 8, and I've taken care of it. And so I'd like to see that more among groups rather than in competition with each other. It's all about the dogs and finding them homes and placing them in a good place.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that the Irish program, which was really the first one, opened my eyes to is I met a bunch of Greyhound adoption folks all around the country just through doing the import permits and moderating the Facebook working group and so forth. And that's been a lot of fun. We see a lot of interaction. We see some working together for that. We see groups sharing transports that maybe they can't get the 8 Greyhounds that are the most economical to fly, so they'll take 2, and another local group will take 2, and they'll split a transport. So that's good to see. I agree with the two of you. I think Greyhound adoption in the U.S. is alive and well. I think we're viewed now by the international Greyhound community as the great oasis of Greyhound adoption. They know that we've got almost insatiable appetite for Greyhounds in terms of their popularity as pets. So I'm optimistic about the future of our movement and our community. I think it's going to be do great. We just have to hope that we can continue to get the airlines to cooperate. That's, they're where the rubber meets the road in terms of the costs and just the ability to physically move the Greyhounds from Ireland or England or Australia or New Zealand or wherever it may be. We depend on them. So here's some hoping that those airlines will continue to, keep costs about where they are. They're not cheap, but keep where they are and keep being willing to fly the dogs.
Yep.
Well, folks, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I hope we've shed some light especially for our international listeners and viewers who may not, be familiar with how Greyhound adoption works in the U.S. And I certainly appreciate two veterans like you contributing to the information. So thanks again for joining us. And listeners and viewers, we'll see you next time on Greyhound Adoption. Greyhound Nation, I should say.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show. Follow us and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. You can also get new show notifications when you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you like the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. We'd like to thank Bob Koch and Debra Hardman for joining us on the show. Bob's organization, Nittany Greyhounds, is located in central Pennsylvania. You can learn more at nittanygrays.org. That's NITTANYGREYS.org. Debra serves the Arizona chapter of the Greyhound Adoption League of Texas, catering to adopters in Arizona, California, Utah, Nevada, and New Mexico. And you can learn more about GALT-AZ at GALT-AZ.org. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.